Hello, welcome to Issues and Ideas. I'm Chris DeBello. Guess what? You get a raise, you get a raise, you get a raise if you're making minimum wage. New Jersey's minimum wage set to increase from the current $15.49 an hour to $15.92 per hour for most employees. This will be January 1st, 2026. Represents about a 3% rise over the current minimum wage. Department of Labor and Workforce Development announced this as part of their annual adjustment process, ties the wage increases to inflation data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. State's constitution mandates that minimum wages be reviewed and adjusted each year based on the Consumer Price Index data. Once scheduled increases for small seasonal employers finish up in 2028 and for farm workers in 2030, all categories, because you'll see in a moment, they're different wages for different classifications, but all categories by 2030 will move forward under the same inflation-based system. So here's how it all breaks down. Starting on January 1st, 2026, minimum wage for small business and seasonal employees will go from $14.53 to $15.23. Agricultural workers, pay increases follow a separate timeline through 2030. They'll see their hourly rate grow from $13.40 an hour to $14.20. Tipped workers who are paid on a different wage structure, they'll go from $5.62 to $6.05 an hour. And employees in long-term care facilities, their base wage increase will go from $18.49 to $18.92 per hour. Now, for everyone else I mentioned at the beginning, you'll go from $15.49 to $15.92. Labor Commissioner Robert Acero Angelo said this increase will provide vital support to all Garden State workers by making the dream of a livable wage reality. Nice fantasy there. With October being Domestic Violence Awareness Month, my first guest brings much-needed attention to what abused women are facing in family court as they seek to escape from their abuser. Instead, they're the ones being accused of crimes and also being prevented from custody of their children, which, of course, leaves the kids in the hands of the abuser in most cases. The reality she and her co-author reveal replaces, I think, many myths even abused women have about the family court system, and will hopefully provoke change for the better sooner rather than later. The book is Framed: Women in the Family Court Underworld, co-authored by Amy Polacco and my guest, Dr. Christine Cocchiola. How are you today, Doctor?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on, Chris.
Got a couple of websites, and we do have them on our homepage as well to find out more about Framed, the book, narcfreepress.com, and learn more about Dr. Cocchiola's work, coercivecontrolconsulting.com. Yeah. Now, what you write about is, again, I think, busting a myth that, okay, a court is going to be my safety. It's going to be my refuge. It's going to be where things will be made right. But the family court system doesn't operate as a criminal court system does it?
No, it doesn't. We don't have trial. We don't have, jury by trial. And sadly, there's just a hierarchical belief system that when mothers come to court with accusations of abuse, that they are lying and they are often disbelieved. It's really rather heartbreaking.
And yet the abuser can come in with a story. And how do you apply some sort of basis of understanding of how a judge overseeing a family court issue can put any kind of merit into what an abuser is saying as someone who is already facing charges?
I really think it comes down, you probably know a little bit of my background, but I actually researched coercive control for my doctoral work, but I've been doing this work since the age of 19. And the reality is abusers do have a type, but we really don't often look at the type. And, they can show up as charlatans in the family court system and anywhere. Frankly, John Grisham just published a book called Framed, and it's stories, the atrocious stories of people living in the criminal justice system who have been wrongfully accused. This happens over and over again, but the problem is in family court, it's happening to our most vulnerable. It's happening to women and children. And, we really need to recognize that abusers have intent. Abusers have intent, and this is what they do. And they purposefully harm, and because they want revenge, because they feel like they have lost control when a victim attempts to escape.
Is it narcissism or is it just plain anger?
Yeah, so I would say that so Dr. Ramani and I are colleagues and friends, and she and I agree that coercive control is a really harmful experience of narcissistic abuse, is what we call it. So it's not just narcissism; it's a pathology of abuse that really intensifies. And when people reach this kind of harmful behavior, they often are looking for revenge. There's actually a recent research study that came out that talks about the dark tetrad, and it's truly like people who are narcissistic, but also Machiavellianism, also psychopathy, where they're willing to break the law, and then sadism, where they actually enjoy the game of hurting others, and it becomes for them a game, and the family court becomes the stage. It becomes their playground to interact in this game.
Your book, Framed Women in the Family Court Underworld, features stories from 22 women who, a standing ovation for them from coming forward, because just like with veterans who go through battles on the battlefield in war, talking about their experiences can be very challenging, and more voices are certainly needed, and you're adding 22 very valuable ones, and not just from the U.S. This is an issue in the UK, Canada, and Australia. Talk about give an example of what is happening and what's a woman, through the stories that you present and Framed, what are they being subjected to?
Sure. So I think it's so, first of all, right, this is a worldwide problem. We need to really talk about the fact that 35% of women suffer violence in their lifetime in the world. And that if that's the violence that they're experiencing, what of all the people who are experiencing other abuses that are not necessarily something that we can visibly see, right? And so there's a lot of people and a lot of women suffering violence. And in these family systems, children are growing up with a predator in their own home. And so really understanding that abusers show up in a way, and our stories detail this, like they don't show up with a sign saying, I'm an abuser. Nobody goes into a relationship thinking they're going to be with an abuser. They actually go into the relationship thinking that it's a good relationship, that it's a loving relationship. And abusers are really good at hiding the worst parts of their personality traits. And so when a victim is in that relationship, abusers do a lot of things, including love bombing, which is now considered part of the UK's coercive control legislation, where they engage the victim into believing that they're this good human being and that they care. And then from there, they're going to continue to try to maintain control, and they do that in ways that are like intimidation and isolation and certainly gaslighting and manipulation. And then from there, once the victim attempts to escape, and this is what all our stories show. They show the beginning, they show that middle of maintaining control, and then when the victim attempts to escape, there is an attempt by the abuser to retain or regain control. And they do that, sadly, by using the court system, financial abuse, and weaponizing the children. This is the pattern of behavior. For any of your listeners who are thinking, this can't be true, this doesn't really happen in the world, the reality is that this is happening all too often, and we simply are not talking about it. And it's creating an intergenerational trauma. Abuse is very common. We just don't talk about it a lot.
So Dr. Christine Cocchiola, who, along with Amy Polacco, is the co-author of the book Framed Women in the Family Court Underworld, narcfreepress.com. Learn more about Dr. Cocchiola's work, coercivecontrolconsulting.com. We have those two links to our homepage as well, and you're listening to Issues and Ideas. How much of this falls upon the judge in these cases, whether these are continued in family court or through the abuser's allegations that winds up in criminal court? Are judges just not well in touch enough with the issue of domestic violence? They're used to seeing the concrete of laws in a law book. We're talking about some emotional abstract here now, too. Is that what's throwing them off the game and opening the door for these abusers to do the moves that they're doing?
Sure. So I say domestic abuse is honestly the shadow pandemic, but these lawyers, when they go to school, they don't have to take a course in domestic abuse. Then they end up in family court working these cases and maybe become a judge. And so what we have is a lot of judges who don't really understand, again, the pathology of abusers, their intent to coerce and control others. We also have judges who might actually not care for frankly. That's what we keep seeing. It's like judges who truly believe in the hierarchy of the world. In other words, they are in a position of power. They get to dictate, and they think mothers lie. And this is hugely problematic. We actually have a research study that affirms that mothers are disbelieved at a rate of 55% when they bring forward domestic abuse in their relationship. If they bring forward physical abuse, they're disbelieved 73% of the time, and that's physical abuse of the children. And if they bring forward sexual abuse of the children, they're disbelieved 85% of the time. The system itself is not equipped and, or shall I say, adept at really determining what an abuser looks like and how they behave. And then I think the third thing is that they just want these cases over with. And they're not really willing to take the time to acknowledge what's going on, but they also may fear, like, for lack of a better word, like when you go up against an abuser, there's going to be a fallout. And that's what's happening with the victim. There's always a fallout. So the expectation that the institutions would actually support victims and survivors is an expectation that's not being fulfilled at all.
The challenge, I guess, that lays before us is, and certainly the 22 voices that your book Framed brings forward, I think will be a great educational tool and empowerment for other women to read that story, because I've always said that someone in the darkness of abuse can't see that first step. It looks like a step over the canyon, but when they see that others have taken that step and they can too, I think that's one of the ways your book will make a difference. But the other side of this lands with the courts, and for anything to change in the courts, family court, criminal court, that rests with either local or state legislatures, to a lesser degree, strangely enough, with the federal legislators, but it's really local and state legislatures that have to step forward. What's the missing piece that needs to be put to make that picture complete?
Yeah, so we have coercive control legislation here in the United States in 7 states, and actually New Jersey just passed theirs. And what it means is we've codified coercive control as a form of domestic abuse. But what that really means is that 43 states in our country, unless a victim has physical evidence of abuse, they're not considered a victim. And so you can imagine that's hugely problematic, right? And then in addition to that, we don't criminalize it. So it's again, it remains a family matter instead of a criminal matter, which is the problem is this criminal court and the family court are not really communicating about who these predators are at a high rate. And even if an abuser has been physically violent, either to the adult victim or to the children, there is still this intent that children should have a relationship with both parents. And if a protective parent, a protective mother says, I'm worried about the safety of my children, then in fact, oftentimes she is actually seen as the wrongful person, and custody is taken away from her. And, for your listeners, if they think this is not like a real prevalent problem, I'm telling you, it is an epidemic. It is happening over and over again. It is like the dark underworld. That's why we call it the dark underworld of family court, because it truly is. And abusers have a playbook, and they have a way to prey upon their victims. And literally the devastation they leave in their path is just immeasurable. The intergenerational trauma that is totally preventable. It's something that we really hope this book creates a movement. Like, we have a movement going, but we really want to propel it. We want this to be a story that everybody is familiar with, that not one person says, that's not true, that doesn't happen. We truly need to believe victims and to believe children when they fear being with an abuser.
I have to make mention as we close the segment here that the 22 voices that are featured in the book Framed, the women in the family court underworld, those aren't the only 22 voices experiencing what Dr. Cocchiola and her co-author Amy Polacco have presented. It is, as the doctor says, an epidemic that needs a light shined on it for the reality to come forward and be seen. This book, Framed, is an empowerment for you if you are part of that darkness, who you feel trapped in, but you do have a path and escape, even though the odds seem to be stacked against you. And if there is somebody in your life who you think would do well by gaining this empowerment, please get a copy of Framed for them and be that person in the life to help them take that first step out of the darkness. Learn more at narcfreepress.com. Learn more about Dr. Cocchiola's work at coercivecontrolconsulting.com. Again, the book, and we have it on our homepage as well, Framed, Women in the Family Court Underworld. Doctor, for a part of our society that is being held down and the attempt is to keep them in the darkness and under a kidnapping limitation and restriction. I think your book holds a key to an escape for them and a wake-up call for those who are hopefully going to be wiser decision makers regarding this issue. Thank you for the work that you and your co-author are doing and bringing this issue forward. Thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it. We both do. We are really hopeful that Framed can be the expose that we need to have.
Protesting has certainly flourished in the recent times, especially recent days, has it not? In fact, coming up on October 18th, there'll be the next No Kings protests. So far, over 2,500 registered No Kings events. You can find out more about that at nokings.org. And while protesting may be a new experience for people who take part in one, certainly not a new means and method in America to bring attention to a cause or create change. Protesting really is part of the heritage of America when you think about it. My next guest with her latest book guides you through acts of protest throughout the ages of America. You'll recognize some of the causes and people, while others will be an introduction for you. Her book is A Protest History of America. Being an author, she is a professor of constitutional law and Africana Studies at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. She also wrote and hosted the Emmy Award-winning PBS series Your Democracy. Gloria Browne-Marshall, how are you today, Gloria?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Well, thank you for doing this book. I'd like to learn more about John Jay College. It's jj.cuny.edu. We have that link over at our homepage. As your book quickly introduces people to the fact of protesting being a lengthy part, if not a foundation of America's history, and you talk about so many of the variables as far as purpose and cause and direction, creation, is there a common thread of that protest share throughout history that you found in your research?
I found about 2 or 3 common threads. One is that there's a vision of the country or a vision of personal freedoms that are beyond what the status quo is offering. And so, therefore, people want to push against what's being offered and expand rights to include more than what they have been given. Another is a hope beyond what they have. Because when you think about the little person, the little guy pushing up against the status quo that includes the courts and the government and the money and everything, there's got to be a belief that's beyond just that little person's belief. It's almost like they've attuned into something that's greater than oneself. And then the final is a faith that even though it may feel like these are insurmountable odds, that they can push forward and create something new and different. And that's how we've been able, from the Declaration of Independence all the way up to today, expand our country to be more than it ever thought it could be.
Because when you think about it, you mentioned Declaration of Independence, one of the first protests of note in colonial America resulted in the Battle of Bunker Hill and led to the Revolutionary War, which led to the Declaration of Independence.
Exactly. So you have these colonists who were ragtag people coming together as farmers and merchants and others, fighting the monarch, King George and all that was established at the time. And so whether or not it's Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement or it's the women's movement, we have interviews in my book, A Protest History of the United States, with Gloria Steinem, with people who were in college at a time in which they were fighting for voting rights. And so from the colonial time period of the indigenous people fighting against the Europeans taking their land and holding on, the indigenous holding on to their culture. So I expand the idea of what protest is and the different ways in which people have protested, because it's always been more than just a protest in the street. It's always included people sending in letters, petitioning, and standing up for their rights, like Rosa Parks not giving up her seat. All those different ways in which people can protest. So there's a forum for people to protest and a vision for people to want a country that's beyond what's being handed to them.
That brings up the point, too, because not every protests are planned protests. Some could be very spontaneous, and I guess the word is organic. They just grow within themselves to make the voice a loud voice.
Exactly. But what I found in my research in writing my book, A Protest History of the United States, is that once that first trigger, the emotion of it, the anger, frustration, or whatever that people have about their employment situation, that's how labor unions were formed, because the workers said, no, I want something beyond what you're handing me. I want more safety. I need more money. I need to have better standard of living. And so they protested and formed unions. So they start off with the emotional part, but then becomes more strategic. And protest is then used to change policies and create other freedoms and have laws repealed or laws changed or laws created that are going to protect freedoms that may be on paper in the Constitution, but they become a reality of a situation. And that's what protest does. It takes what might be written on paper in the Constitution and makes it a reality for day-to-day life. And one of the major examples is that of the 8-hour workday. That took, from a law that was passed in the 1800s, it took decades for it to become a part of our day-to-day life. So when we wake up each day, we're waking up with the benefits of protest, even though we've forgotten that it took protest to make it our reality.
You mentioned what's written in the Constitution. It's also what's written in court decisions from the lower courts to the Supreme Court. And what's promised is not always, as the phrase goes, justice for all. Which brings about the question, I think, that you answer so well in your book, A Protest History of the United States. The civil rights movement was a lot more than what we just saw in the 50s and 60s, isn't it?
It really is. And it took a lot longer than people thought because we saw it on television. Because think about the development of television to show us the civil rights movement. Before that, remember, you know better than I do, that it was radio. And so you really couldn't capture the civil rights movement's emotions and everything in the context of it on radio. So with the development of TV and being able to see television news more often and nationally, we began to see the civil rights movement actually take effect. But it was in the works decades before that, as was the women's movement. Women gained the right to vote in 1920. They had been working on the right to vote for 50 years before that, at least. And so when we think about what we're able to see, we begin to realize when you research, especially from my research and the protest history of the United States, just how long change takes. And people want the change right away. They want to protest on Friday and see the change on Monday, and that's not normally how it works when it comes to protest.
Talking with Gloria Browne-Marshall and her book, A Protest History of the United States. You're listening to Issues and Ideas. I mentioned the No Kings rallies that are next round is coming up on October 18th, and they have almost 2,500 locations planned. You look at how that movement began. It was a couple of hundred locations, maybe 50 people there, 25 people there. And within, I think, about 6 months, it's grown to this level. So sometimes protest requires devotion and dedication, devotion and faith side of things, certainly, but devotion to a cause as well.
It certainly does. And once it begins to pick up steam, you'll see leaders emerge from the protests. And the government or the corporation or whatever is at the heart of protest will then start cracking down. And as it gets worse in its treatment of protesters, because protesting is inherently dangerous, because the status quo, the society, the traditionalists, and other people will think, who are you to stand up against us? Don't you understand we know what's best for you? You take what we give you and be quiet about it. And if you're not going to be quiet, then we're going to crack down, we're going to use violence, and then other people join in and try to start using violence as well, and then vigilante groups. So you're going to see these standoffs between people who are protesting, and more people then join in the protest, saying that's not fair, that's not the way people should be treated. And as that begins to expand, the protest, as you pointed out, will bring in more and more people who are persuaded that they too have to take a stand on behalf of the rights that we want to enjoy.
Of all the people that you focus on in A Protest History of the United States, as I referred to in the introduction, some will be recognizable to people, but who's one of the people you write about that you hope people will want to learn even more about, study more about, and learn from them, and what they accomplished, what they gave their dedication to, and the cause that they brought attention to?
I would say I'm going to mention Tom Hayden from University of Michigan. He was a protester who gave us the teach-in. And that was something that's very important. We need to learn what these issues are. Why are we protesting? What are we protesting about? And what strategies can we use? He used the idea of the educational system to say, let's take it beyond the classroom into the communities. I think people should have more teach-ins around the issues. What does it mean to have a No King's Day? Why is it thought of that this person in the White House now is acting like a king, besides the fact he called himself one? But why are we in need of protest right now? And another person I would say is Daisy Bates. Now, that was another form of protest. She was a secretary of the NAACP in Little Rock, Arkansas, and she was the one who helped young people desegregate the Central High School there in Little Rock. And she also went on to stand up against people who wanted to force her to disclose the members of the NAACP there. She almost, was put in jeopardy so many times and was threatened many times. And these are two very different people in two different eras, but they represent different forms of protest. And I think they were very well known in their time, but then time passes and we don't know them. And so a protest history of the United States talks about what the indigenous did in their forms of protest 500 years ago, the enslaved uprisings as a form of protest, as well as anti-war protests, forming unions. What I want people to get is that there are so many ways in which you can protest. Yes, you can march in the street, but the nameless people, and as you mentioned, 2,500 protests around the country they're going to be formed by people who will never know their name, but will benefit from their actions. But people who have led protests have put themselves in jeopardy as well. And we should remember who they are and the sacrifices they made.
And for you listening, I want to give you a reminder, too. If you're one of those people who thinks that protesting is just talking and nothing results from it, well, let me give you a name to remind you of the importance of protesting. Lech Wałęsa, who was a shipyard worker in Poland, and the protests he led in those shipyards, put it mildly, certainly changed the direction of the country of Poland, did it not, as it shook free from communism. So if you can do it on a grand scale, you could do it on a local scale, and you can achieve what's righteous and just. I mean, you can certainly have beliefs that are toxic and poison, and once you try standing for those, you'll quickly learn that they are what they are. But for protesting what is right, what is fair, what is just, there's no reason not to do everything you can to ensure that all that comes about for everybody. To learn more and get a better understanding of protest history in our nation, that's why Gloria's book is the go-to, A Protest History of the United States. Along with being an author, she's professor of constitutional law and Africana studies at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Also an Emmy Award-winning writer and host of the PBS series Your Democracy. Gloria Browne-Marshall, thank you for the reminder of this important element of our history as a nation and how it preserves and strengthens us as a nation. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you, and power to the people.
It's time once again for Trump Said It.
Have you given any more thought to possibly suspending habeas corpus to not only deal with these insurrectionists across the nation, but also to continue rapidly deporting illegal aliens?
Yeah, is suspending who?
Habeas corpus.
So, I don't know. I'd rather leave that to Christie. What do you think?
No, sir, I haven't been a part of any discussions on that.
Past week, Attorney General Pam Bondi garnered a bit of attention for her hissing and spitting episode in front of a Senate committee. Reaction has been that Bondi attacked committee Democrats instead of responding to their questions. The Democrats were criticized for asking tough questions, but to be fair, committee Republicans asked Bondi questions as well, and there were some tough ones. I mean, not everyone can answer questions like what's your favorite color or Super Bowl halftime show, Bad Bunny or Lee Greenwood at the spur of the moment. It's a big ask for some people. But while all that was going on, the head of HHS, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., made his contribution to the insanity this past week as well.
I'll say one other thing about Tylenol, only because of this. This morning before I came in here, somebody showed me a TikTok video of a pregnant woman, 8 months pregnant. She is an associate professor at the Columbia Medical School. and she is saying F Trump and gobbling Tylenol with her baby in her placenta. And the level of Trump derangement syndrome has now left the political landscapes, and it is now in the realm of pathology. And a mother could overwhelm millions of years of maternal instinct to put her baby at risk. And all you have to do is look at the studies which you and I talked about. It's not dispositive that causes autism. It is so suggestive that anybody who takes this stuff during pregnancy, unless they have to, is irresponsible. There are 15 rodent studies. Every one of them shows if you give it to the mother, the babies, and particularly the male babies, have profound neurological and behavioral changes. There is a study from Johns Hopkins on cord blood where they divided women into 3 categories: those who had the least acetaminophen in their cord blood, and those who had the most. The ones with the most had 3.6 times the rate of autism in their children. The middle category had 2.2 times, so it's a dose-related response. And there are dozens of studies that show the countries that use the most have the highest level of autism. Cuba has the lowest level in the world of acetaminophen use, and it has the lowest autism rate in the world. So this is not dispositive. It is not proof. We're doing the studies to make the proof. But in the meantime, the precautionary principle should apply. And any mother who is taking this stuff during pregnancy just to get back at Donald Trump is doing something that is pathological. And we're seeing that across the board. I got a lot of other stuff to talk about, but I know we got a short time here. But thank you, Mr. President. You're making our country healthier again.
RFK Jr. thought the cabinet meeting was the best time and place to come out with that, but it provides a lesson. It's always important to listen to someone like that, because the more you let them talk, the more they reveal about themselves, and that's exactly what RFK Jr. did. Did you catch them? Let's start with the woman on the TikTok video that he referred to. TikTok always a very reliable source for factual information. He mentioned the baby in her placenta. Well, a baby develops in the uterus, not the placenta. The placenta is a temporary organ that develops in the uterus during pregnancy, provides oxygen, nutrients, hormones for the growing baby. Then the other gem from RFK Jr., referring to the statistics that he was going on about, his words, "It is not proof. We're doing the studies to make the proof." Well, in actual science, Mr. Kennedy, that's called theory. And this is who's in charge of America's health policy. This past week, it was announced that Israel and Hamas agreed to a 20-point peace plan. First step, which Israel took on Friday, was a withdrawing of troops from Gaza. Next important step to be taken will be the release of all hostages by Hamas, which will include the remains of those who died while they were in custody, while Israel will release dozens of Palestinian prisoners. Now, many are looking at this immediate action as mission accomplished. Is it? Can hope spring eternal, where violence has been taking place for what feels like eternity? The next guest joins us to examine what's been established and what lies ahead for peace to result in the Middle East. He's Executive Director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East and Executive Director of the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa. Asaf Romirowsky, how are you today, sir?
Good. How you doing?
Good to have you here to get some realistic view of what is happening already on a fast pace. But is the celebration premature? What we've been, the immediate reaction, at least, I mean, it's certainly good news. But if you look at the 20-point plan, we've got a long way to go here.
100%. I mean, I think that it is a monumentous event that we even got to this point, and the fact that exactly marking 2 years, the 2-year anniversary since the horrific war began on October 7th, 2023. I think that we need to remain positive, cautiously optimistic. We are dealing with a jihadi, barbaric, Islamist terror organization vis-a-vis Hamas. That being said, I think that the setup is good in the sense that they signed the agreement. They were pressured by their own patrons, namely Qatar and Turkey, to make this happen, basically arguing to Hamas that after 2 years, this is the best deal you're going to get. I would also clarify, based on your earlier comments, it's not dozens. It's we're talking about Israel is going to release close to 1,700 active terrorists that were captured since the beginning of the war, plus another 250, which that were life sentence prisoners that have been in Israeli jails. Again, who've been doing, who've been engaged in horrific acts against Israelis and Jews and Americans for decades. And so that's what's going to happen in exchange. The number one issue, to your earlier point, really has been the hostages, the dead and alive, in order to bring closure. That they have been the focal point of the psychological warfare that we've been engaged with since the beginning of the war.
We've certainly been at this point several times over the history of Israel, but is this agreement different because for at least this time, Israel is not the one giving up the most? It seems to be Hamas has to give up the most here.
Well, it depends how you look at it. I mean, I think that, Israel has suffered, a great deal of casualties throughout this war. There are over close to 900 soldiers who died throughout the course of this war. The hostages, the psychological warfare, as I mentioned before. There are still a lot of unclear and open-ended questions that need to be looked at. One has to do with the fact that the disarmament of Hamas, and Hamas's role in the day after tomorrow, that's a non-starter for the Israelis. That was part of the demands of the Trump 20 points that were laid out for them. And in exchange for that, they are to receive amnesty for the leadership to go to either Turkey or Qatar. And so they are getting a safe passage as far as that in order for the exchange for this to happen. But there's still a lot of questions about how this is all going to look like, and does this come to fruition? And again, when you release active terrorists, I mean, are they going to basically fortify the bench? I mean, how does all of this play out? Unclear. The Israelis agreed, to move back militarily-wise as far as their active military actions surrounding the Gaza City, and so they will move back on that. So I think it's, as has been leaked and put out there, it's phase one. This is not a full comprehensive peace process. It's a phase one that will lead to hopefully changing the environment after 2 years. I think that the Trump administration, I think that there is positivity, that there is with this act, a potential of bringing around particularly the Saudis to join the Abraham Accords deal. The Saudis predicated their involvement on the ending of the war, and this could be the carrot that will bring the Saudis around the table. The Saudis have already had unofficial diplomatic relations with Israel, as we saw with the attack when it came to dealing with Iran. And will this be formalized as a result of what's going on with Gaza? That is the potential that, I think could potentially happen and would be extremely positive.
You mentioned the Abraham Accords, and you point out, too, how the Arab nations played a role in making this happen. Of course, the U.S. was the lead horse, but the Arab nations were part of the team, no doubt. Would this have happened without the Abraham Accords? Would the Arab nations have climbed on to the degree they finally did with said to Hamas, you try to prove a point, you're not going to do it this way. Let's just move on and turn the page and go to some other strategy here.
Well, I don't think it sort of happened without the current administration. I mean, I think the President Trump and his administration, and the fact that they have been almost lock and step with the Israelis on understanding what the threats are in the region, what are the regional challenges, and I think that the relationship between Netanyahu and Trump has been extremely positive and extremely strong, to move this along. This architecture has been set up by Trump's team vis-a-vis Witkoff and Kushner, and I think that's been extremely positive. But again, in conjunction with the Arab world, and I would also say that contextually it's worth noting that Trump did set this up during the General Assembly in September when he was meeting a lot of the leaders of the Arab world when they were here in New York. and he met with the president of Turkey and others, and so trying to make sure that he had all his ducks in line in order to move this along for a larger, comprehensive move here, which is what you're seeing, coming to fruition now with this first phase. Again, there are a lot of unknowns, but I think that the number one issue that's been a major sticking point from the beginning of the war is releasing the hostages. The war could have ended, months ago, had there been pressure to release the hostages, and Hamas could have ended this. And that's been the ongoing motivation by the Israelis from the get-go to continue the war.
So with Asaf Romirowsky, who is Executive Director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East and Executive Director of the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa, you're listening to Issues and Ideas. You mentioned Benjamin Netanyahu. Did he make a mistake when, in what he thought were private conversations, that Netanyahu alluded that he was the boss in the relationship with Trump, and he was leading Trump around and forcing the issues with Trump? And just by observation, that's not something you try to do when you're dealing with Donald Trump. And I think Netanyahu found that out.
Look, I think that Benjamin Netanyahu has been around for a very long time, has his own healthy ego. As far as him being one of the longest sitting prime minister Israel has ever had, and having negotiated with many U.S. presidents for that matter. I think that there's a lot of push and pull when you're dealing with diplomatic negotiators and when you're dealing with world leaders and trying to move along different interests and national interests. I think that the two allies need each other, and they have shown that they can work together and successfully. I mean, I think that the attack in Iran in the summer was a phenomenal feat and showing the U.S.-Israel alliance at its best. And coming together, dealing with a common enemy. And by the way, all of the fronts that Israel has been fighting in the region have been also enemies of the United States. So I think that there has been a difference of, potentially tactics and policies as it relates. But I think the overall message that they're mostly on the same page. But the United States is still the United States. As far as the world stance versus the state of Israel. And I think that was also clear in how this came about as well. I mean, there's no doubt that this never would have happened if it weren't for the pressure and for the architecture that Donald Trump set up.
The conversation, at least thus far, has primarily been focusing on the two parties, Israel and Hamas. What does this peace agreement mean for the people of Gaza? Which I think that we need to pay more attention to, because their homeland is pretty much rubble for the most part.
Well, so that's the big question. I mean, I think that the biggest challenge also is that Hamas has also been a threat to Palestinian society, and disentangling Hamas from Palestinian society. And now the big question is, what does the reconstitution, rehabilitation of Gaza looks like? I mean, as part of what has been laid out there, put out there, that the fact that, individuals like Tony Blair and others would be involved in the reconstitution, and who's going to be the major parties within, outside European and Arab money and other, U.S. involvement as well, as far as rebuilding Gaza. That's where, I think the potential, to my earlier point, vis-a-vis the Saudi involvement and whatnot. And then there's a fundamental question, which we should not forget, is the Palestinian Authority itself. And the Palestinian Authority, which is run by an octogenarian who's been serving 20 years of a 4-year term, and he has also been supportive of Hamas's action. So there's also a question of trust, and does he, is his narrative any that far different than Hamas? Unclear. He has definitely been, out there supporting Hamas's actions. So there needs to be a question of cracking down on the ideology, the education, the incitement. These are all problems that need to be fixed. And there are all obviously granular problems as far as structurally rebuilding Gaza, aid, all these questions that need to be looked at as far as an infrastructure that we built. Let's not forget that for 20 years, Hamas has been building an underground tunnel maze, a terror tunnel maze that they've been using. And so all of that needs to be taken apart, and it has been taken apart, thankfully, by the Israelis, but the whole area needs to be rebuilt, and that's going to take years.
Wrap up here with a reminder for you listening. If you look at the 20-point plan, and there's many resources you can do just that, you think that we're going through, as I said back, a time of celebration. Well, let's wait and see what happens when we get to the point where Hamas members are being called on to accept peaceful coexistence with Israel, while those who don't want to go with that line can be sent to countries who might accept them. And keep in mind that that idea goes directly 180 degrees opposite of what the Hamas Charter is all about. So, as I said, it's a great start, and let's see if momentum can carry the positive further into the 20 points of the peace plan. We've been talking with the Executive Director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East and Executive Director of the Association for the Study of the Middle East and Africa. We have links to those two sites at our homepage. Asaf Romirowsky, thank you for the insight of the facts, the truth, and the realistic ideas of what lies ahead. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, as always. I appreciate it.
Well, it happened again. We had a church claim that they knew the day that the rapture would happen. In case you were wondering, they said the rapture was going to happen September 23rd and 24th. Yeah, I wondered why 2 days, too. I mean, I know there's going to be a lot of people, but we're told this in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 52, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. Now, don't get upset. The rapture didn't happen. You didn't get left behind. This was just one of the many times false teachers have lied to people, causing them to sell everything they have just to be humiliated, which I never understood why these people sell everything they own. It's not like you're going to take the money with you. This time the false rapture claim was done by a fringe so-called church. Maybe the best known recent example of this false claim. Remember televangelist Harold Camping? Claimed he knew the day of the rapture, and that was proven wrong. He said, well, I've recalculated, and obviously he was wrong second time, too. All of these perpetrators are blind to, I think, one of the most clear lessons by Jesus regarding the rapture. He even repeats it and expands on it. This is all in Matthew chapter 24. Jesus reveals this in verse 36. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. And we have this in verse 42. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. And Jesus adds this in verse 44. Therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. This teaching by Jesus is retold throughout the New Testament. Let's go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 2. For you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. You also read this in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 10. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. These false teachers really belong in the same category as witches, psychics, fortune tellers, mediums. They take advantage of people's faith and hopes to gain for themselves. This is what God says about all of these frauds in Leviticus chapter 20, verse 6. And the person who turns to mediums and familiar spirits to prostitute himself with them, I will set my face against that person and cut him off from his people. Additionally, in 1 John chapter 4, verse 1, we read this, Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. All throughout the Bible, we're warned about false prophets and teachers, along with how their rise will be a sign that the end times are approaching. We learn this in Matthew chapter 24, verse 24. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. And we're given an even stronger warning in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 13 through 15. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ, and no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness, whose end will be according to their works. It's only God who knows what's to come and when. It's his word which prepares us for what's to come, It's why his son was sent to teach and die for our sins. So why do you need to have faith in anyone else? Don't forget to check out our website, issuesandideasradio.com. We have more information about the guests who joined us here on the show today. And as we talked about earlier, October is National Domestic Abuse Awareness Month. We have an entire section of the website dedicated to that cause with relief, rescue, encouragement, and a lot more. You'll find that and a great deal of other items and information and even entertainment at issuesandideasradio.com. Always grateful and thankful for your time and attention. It's very important, valuable, and special to us. Look forward to being with you right here this time next week for our next edition of Issues and Ideas.